Hello all, and welcome to today's webinar on sports presentations. My name is Anna Robb, and you may have seen me before, having attended some of our webinars with Theatre Art Life. I'm going to introduce these guys to you in just a minute, but first of all, as you may well know, there's a couple of housekeeping things that we need to go into first. So just to begin, on the right there's the chat box, so make sure that you can throw some questions in there if you'd like to, and ask these sports pros any questions you like throughout the session. If there's any reasons you drop out, you can log back in any time via the email link. It doesn't expire, so just come back in. Sometimes you can't hear us, so log out, log back in if you've got any audio issues. And if your internet is spotty, don't worry, a replay will be sent to you 24 hours at least after this session, and it'll be available for 5 days so that you can rewatch the discussion and go over anything that we hash out. So if you have any questions regarding that, just throw it in the chat box and let's get started. All right, so I'm going to ask these guys to introduce themselves, tell us where they are and what they do for Sports Pres, and then we'll kick off this discussion. So Josh, can you start?
Yeah, sure can. G'day everybody, my name's Josh Hyman, and I'm currently sitting in lovely Sydney, overcast and grey, but apart from that, it's very good. I have been in the entertainment industry for about 20 years. I started off as a stage manager in New Zealand, working in local theatre productions, and then moved into sports pres probably about 10 years ago, and now kind of exclusively focus on show calling, both corporate events, sports pres, opening ceremonies, opening doors, anything that will have me really, and that's pretty much me.
Fantastic. And Sam?
My first job was at Expo 88 in Brisbane. That's where I am at the moment, here in Brisbane, Australia and Queensland. I fell in love with theatre there and did a course in Toowoomba studying stage management, and came out of that course and worked for drama and dance and theatre in Brisbane before moving to musicals. The first musical I did was Disney's Beauty and the Beast in Melbourne, which was the first off-Broadway Disney production in the world, and then moved through Cameron McIntosh shows for about 15 years, settled down, met my beautiful wife, we had children, were then teaching stage management at QUT, where I was called one day to assist with some sports presentation at a local ground, moving a choir from one side of the field to the other, and from there I was hooked on sport presentation. So like Josh, I'll turn up to the opening of a newspaper to do anything from floor manage to DJ to opening ceremonies and closing ceremonies, and I do that. I'm very lucky to say all around the world at the moment, apart from at the moment.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sam. And our last one is Kylie-Ann, who these guys call KA, so I'm going to do that too because it's much easier to say than Kylie-Ann all the time. So Kylie-Ann, tell us about yourself. Oh, we can't hear you. Sometimes that happens. So just go out and come back in, Kylie-Ann, and then we'll introduce you, okay? Just leave the room. We have that from sometimes. Okay, what I'd want to get started with while we're waiting for Kylie-Ann to jump back into the room is maybe one of you could tell us some of the similarities between sports pres management and stage management, given the fact that you've done both of those roles.
Go for it, Sam.
When I've been doing sports presentation, I've tried to recruit some of my other fellow theatre stage managers to come in and assist us. We used to, say, travel with a rugby team around Australia, and we need people all around Australia to fulfil some of those roles. And so what I would say is that sport presentation can very much be like a show, in that the actors are the athletes, the field of play is the stage, act one is the first half, interval is half time. It's actually more about just a different language around the presentation of an event, of a show, of a drama, of anything that has an audience. So our script, as you like, might be the protocol of the sport, how long the sport goes for, and what we need to portray through that sport. but very much it's just a different type of presentation, whether that be dance, drama, or sport. And all of those different sports have different modes as well. So the transition from one to the other is not the great leap that I thought it might be when I first got into it years ago.
Oh, thanks for that, Sam. Okay, Kylie-Ann, can you hear us now?
Can you hear me?
Yes. I know what's happened. This happens to anyone that doesn't have earphones in. So that's happened to a couple of other presenters. I should have remembered. So that's the issue.
Oh.
All right. So tell me about yourself.
Okay, so I've been in the business for over 30 years, but I started as a dancer singer. So I started on the other side of the camera. And, when work started to dry up with musical theatre, if there wasn't a show on, people would normally go and work in cafes to get the money. But I decided to get into radio and started working at the #1 radio station here in Sydney. By the way, I'm in Sydney, Australia, in my kitchen dining room area. And Today FM, and was out in their promotional vehicles on the streets of Sydney, like broadcasting live back to the radio station. So I was doing that for a few years and then got into breakfast show announcing. So then decided to go on the other side of the, instead of being the talent, promote the talent. So I was promotions director at a couple of radio stations here in Sydney. And when I was promotions director, started doing a lot of work with rugby league teams and doing some cross promotions, getting the players into the studios, then taking promotions out into the street and cross promotion between the rugby leagues club and the radio station. And then the rugby league club decided to say, or asked me to come and work for them as their event operations manager and run their game days. So that was 26 years ago, and I've never looked back. So I've been in sport ever since. And I do a range of roles, producing, show calling, floor managing, stage managing, event manager. So I do a range of roles in sport pres.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's dig in a little bit. Show calling. What is show calling in sports pres? And I know that Josh does a lot of it. So tell us about that. Tell us what you're calling in a sports pres and how does that work?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the easiest way to understand it is from the audience point of view. And anything that happens on a stadium screen is essentially what we manage in a day. And as a live member of the audience, anything that you see go up to that screen is driven by the sports pres team. And then elements of that will also go out to broadcast as well. But throughout a game day, it's everything from calling music cues mostly. So there's a lot of music which happens through a game day and really drives the experience for a lot of fans as well. So it's kind of understanding how music works. It's calling segments to time of day. So MC segments, you might have a 3-minute segment where you've got to talk about what's coming up in the game, some key players to watch. It's calling in graphics for those moments as well. So anything that goes up the screen, sometimes calling in camera shots and picking out specific players for moments. So it's also calling that kind of stuff as well. Then it's also talking directly into MC and ground announcers' ears and letting them know that they've got a certain amount of time before they need to be finished with the segment, or if there's something that we need them to touch on particularly. So it's very much a combination of a traditional stage manager call, then throwing in elements of director's assistant for television as well, and also some of that kind of live broadcast stuff. So the kind of types of cues that you have range from music, graphics, cameras, videos to when you get into the kind of bigger ceremony stuff, cast entries and all that kind of stuff that goes along with it as well.
Wonderful. And we spoke the other day a little bit on our pre-meet about the preparation time for that sort of show calling role, and that varies a lot from project to project or sport to sport. So could we talk about that a little bit and how much you do or don't get to prepare for that and how you manage that?
Yeah, for sure. So it really varies quite a lot between sports and sometimes between teams as well. It'll vary for everything from you writing the run sheet and working, months out in advance, pulling together all the content with the club or with the team or with the organisations to get everything ready for game day, and then managing that game day run sheet all the way through. Or it could be you show up on the day and get handed someone else's run sheet and you make it work and you call off that run sheet and make changes as you go. That's traditionally mostly what I do. I tend to stay away from working for clubs or for organisations. I just tend to usually come in on the day and manage game day, manage the call, and kind of make executive decisions about how the run sheet's going and change that up as well. So there's really, a really big variety of what you're expected to do within a workday.
And Kylie-Ann, you've done a lot of floor management, and how does that differ from show calling? And what do you do in that role? What's a floor manager?
So the floor manager basically looks after the field, which we call the floor, all the player movements. So anytime the players need to run on the field, you're liaising with broadcast to make sure that our times with the show caller, Josh or Sam, our times are in line with broadcast times. So we marry that up. We usually have a meeting 2 hours prior to kickoff, just to make sure our clocks are the same. And then I manage whatever Josh is calling through our ears, I manage on the field. So getting the entertainment on and off the field, managing MCs, all the player movements, all that sort of stuff on the field. So, so floor manager is eyes and ears for a show caller, because the show caller is stuck up in the production room. So a floor manager cues all the talent onto the field. So a normal floor manager would 3, 2, 1, go, you're live on the screen. But a good floor manager will actually then take it one step further and mini produce segments down on the field, because you are the eyes and ears for the show caller to make the show look good. Yeah.
Do you often have a situation where the live to broadcast doesn't go as planned?
All the time. It's really hard to marry up your run sheet. So also I produce and event manage as well. So in the lead up, where Josh was talking about the lead up and your run sheets, you've got to chat to broadcast, because their show, they have, they've got their hosts talking, and then they'll go to packages, and then they go to commercial breaks. And we have to marry up our certain entertainment on the field to coincide with their television commercial breaks. So if they're running late, if their hosts are talking a little bit longer, and we know that we've got packages or our entertainment goes for 5 minutes, but they actually go longer, we have to then go to a hold into stadium, which Josh and Sam will probably talk about a little bit later, and wait for broadcast to catch up. And then we have to be on our game and ready to go for when broadcast come back live, and then we have to start our stuff on the field.
So it's a constant juggle of dealing with that live aspect of it.
Yeah, very much so.
For the theatre people amongst us, it's like sports presentation is like doing a technical rehearsal that you can't stop to a stadium of 80,000 people to a viewing audience of 1 billion. You can't stop. You have to make it up on the spot. And it's the best fun you can have with your headsets on sometimes.
For sure.
So you're following collectively the actual time of day, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Within some certain parameters. If a game goes late, you'll catch up time, or you have to expand depending on how long the sport section takes. So there's some hard deadlines that you have to hit throughout a day, and then some things that are dictated by how long, if you end up with an overtime or something along those lines, how much time you've got on the back end of those segments. Yeah,
right. I want to bring up the slide we looked at before, Sam, and maybe you can explain some of the roles around the sports press. Let me just flick through it in just a second, and then I can bring it up. It's a little bit laborious here. But if you can start to explain some of the roles that are around you and the people that you are talking to when you're running a show.
Sure. So at the Rio Olympics, I did a sport called modern pentathlon, which is 5 sports in one day. This was the fencing ranking round, where all of the competitors are out on their piece out there, and they all have to battle each other once. This shot was taken by the Federation's in-house photographer in getting the field of play, but it's actually a really nice shot of who we use in sports presentation in this mode, and generally what usually would happen when in all of our control rooms for any sport, if we were doing a full capacity kind of kind of event. Right on the frame left, there's a guy in a black shirt with headsets on. He would be our comms guy. Now, that's usually someone just making sure we can all talk to each other, but also in communication with the venue, with broadcasts, with the competition centres for that particular tournament, making sure we can actually talk to everybody and having the right channels in the usual way. Beside him is a gentleman with long hair and a white shirt. He would be our content playback. So any graphics, any videos, any superimpositions or supers, lower thirds or straps that we might use to either talk about the sport, talk about the competitors, talk about what's going on, overlays for fan cams, kiss cams, bongo cams, all that kind of stuff. And then he would offer that up to the person on the right of him in the white shirt, which would be our vision switcher. So he or she would be taking not only everything that's coming from the content director, but also getting the clean or dirty feed from broadcast. The clean feed is just the pictures. The dirty feed is all of their graphics that go on top. So we usually take a combination of both. And I'm directing those two as to what I want to go to the big screen during competition. So in some competitions, you're not allowed to have anything moving on the screens while competition is going on, because that can be distracting to the athletes. Because in sports presentation, really, it's the athletes that we're there to privilege by making sure their audience is engaged and entertained and informed. So everything has to be about the athletes, really. So I'm directing him as to what I want on the screen, and then he'd be directing the 2 or 3 cameras that we have to then overlay the broadcast feed, and the broadcast feed might have 27 different cameras depending on the sport. The lady in the black shirt is our audio operator, just taking, again, feeds from our MCs. We don't usually take commentary from broadcast because our audience is not the TV audience at home. Our audience are the people that you can see there. So that's what sports presentation is all about. It's not for the people at home. It's for the people who have got their bums into those seats to come and see the athletes play at the time. Beside her is my associate venue producer, Marcella, best AVP in the world. I hope she's listening. She's providing me with results and times and all sorts of stuff that come out of that printer from results. So results are giving us the on-venue results of who actually won, if there are any protests, what the medal orders will be, what the competitor orders are, and exactly what people's names are, so that all that information comes from one source, not our own research from different places. Beside Marcella is Nardo. He's our DJ. I'm beside him. And then beside me are Heather and Virgilio, our 2 announcers. At the Olympics, you're required to have 3 announcers, 1 in the local language, so that was Portuguese, English, and you need a French announcer for the protocol and medal ceremonies. So that's about everyone.
Wonderful. So when you worked on the Olympics there, did you jump around through different sports, and like, were you there? Obviously that's, the judo competition isn't there every day. Like, how big was the team, and where did you fit in within that?
So I was the venue producer, which means I would produce the sport and show call it on the day. And that's a role generally that most of us fit into for the bigger events or the bigger clients, where we produce the show, we get the messaging, we produce the content, and then we deliver it on the day. Josh and I have relationships with different clubs where we'll just come in and show call what they produce during the day. KA does that as well for a lot of her clients. But in that particular one, I was there 2 months beforehand, looking at all the content that was produced, talking about camera angles for us and for broadcast to work out what's going to work and what's not. So in my venue, I did rugby sevens, and then there was a break of 4 to 5 days before we then went into the next sport. All right. So for a bigger tournament like that, it very much depends on the schedule. So for football, for instance, for soccer, they start before the Olympics starts because they need so many grounds, and they do it all around the nation, not exactly the city. Whereas other people I knew were in every day doing gymnastics or swimming or diving for days and days on end. So it just depends on the tournament schedule.
Interesting. I don't know if any of you have something that's on hand close by, but there's a question here about seeing a run sheet. Does anyone have an old run sheet? You could screen share and maybe show that.
Yeah.
We'll get back to that, but if you guys may have one on hand, let's see if we can take a look at that. If there's no IP there involved,
I'll grab one of yours, go.
You gonna find one, Josh?
Yeah, I'll find one.
Wonderful. So, and there's a lot of questions coming in about how to make the transition into the sports world. So bearing in mind, we have got an audience from the UK, the US, New Zealand and places like that. I know that you guys are mainly based in Australia. But how did you get involved into sports press? Like, what was that opportunity where you transitioned? Say, maybe we'll start with you, Sam, from theatre into it. Just be a little bit specific about how you began that role, because obviously when you were doing theatre, you didn't know exactly what sports pres was. So how did you wet your feet, and how did you become comfortable doing this role?
I think for anyone trying to get in, it's really good to get in from the ground and understand what's happening around you before you then identify yourself to say, I want to get up into the box and do some show calling, or I want to floor manage, or I want to do event management with the artists. So, excuse me for the cough, generally taking whatever you can to even just be the person to meet an artist or a group at a door, take them through to the dressing room, then out to the field of play, and then back out again, will give you an understanding of the concepts and the times and the responsibilities involved around you and the other roles as you're doing that, is what I would say.
Mm. And you, Kylie-Ann, you went from the radio to that. So how did you sort of step into that role in terms of learning the hard skill set to be able to deliver the floor management, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, because I've had the background of being a dancer and singer, I sort of, my role with first in sport presentation was more creative, like how to put a show on. It was back when Super League took over here in Australia, and they had lots and lots of money. So it wasn't just about the sport, it was about the entertainment as well. So being on the entertainment side, I sort of knew how to what vision. So then I had to get the right people around me. I'm not a technical person at all, so I always surround myself with good technical people like Josh and Sam. They're very technical. I've got a lot of vision, and I can produce and format, make sure that I have the right people around me. I'll say, I want this to happen, I want this to happen, I want this to happen, and I just make sure that those people can understand my vision there. So I started back in radio, and then learned how to be topical in radio. Certain topics that were out in the news, drop your normal programming to then be topical for your listeners to engage with you all the time. So then I put that into practice into sport presentation and to floor manage, to be topical. Just because you've got a segment and stuff on the floor that's already produced in the run sheet doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it. If there's stuff in the audience, on the floor, happening in the ground somewhere that you think is going to be right for that moment, offer it up.
Offer it up. It's about the offer. It's because, especially with sport, the story changes.
Yeah.
Excuse me. If your team is doing well, generally the sports pres doesn't have to be as good because everybody's involved with the game and the athletes and the win, especially if you're at a home. You've got a home ground advantage. Where sports press becomes more interesting is when you work for teams that aren't doing well and they haven't got big crowds. You have to find new ways to engage them. And I think people like Kylie, who is the best floor manager in the world, to then find stuff in the crowd or stories within the athletes to offer up, you're kind of doing your own dramaturgy as you go. You're trying to find your own stories to present to the audience you have there.
Yeah.
So you're actually, that essentially then becomes quite a creative role, essentially.
Correct. Yeah. So you're like producing on the field as well. So someone's produced the whole show, but a good floor manager will also produce on the floor as well. So some sports are very structured where you don't have time to produce on the fly because you've got a lot of your activations, you've got commercial bits and pieces that you have to get out. It's very structured, but other sports, they have a little bit more time that you can play with, and then you've got time on the field to be creative and offer up. But if you want to transition into sport, you just got to have a lot of vision. You've got to be very proactive. You've got to be a doer. You can't just stand back. You've always got to be one step ahead of yourself. I do a lot of talking and stuff at TAFE and university, and you don't have to have a university degree or a TAFE, anything from TAFE to be able to do this. You just need to have common sense and be a doer and be proactive.
I'm going to bring up the stellar photo of you, and I want you to explain this picture, right? Because I love it.
Oh, wow. This got the most likes on my Facebook page, let me tell you. So this, for the people overseas, this is at an event called State of Origin. Now, State of Origin is probably one of the biggest sporting events in Australia between New South Wales and Queensland. It has, 2 million broadcast viewers. Okay, so players, I would have liaised with the broadcast before this, getting the players out onto the field. So they're out on the field, and we've got to set them up and line them up into the anthem ceremony. So this, you'll see the gentleman in the maroon. He's called Billy Slater. He's just retired. This was his last representative fixture. So Queensland in the maroon like to then put off the New South Wales Blues players, and then they were just taking their time on the field. And I knew that time was getting away, and broadcasters saying, "Come on, Kylie-Ann, you've got to get these players into position." So they were just, stumbling around, and you can see New South Wales Blues there ready to go. And I had to, run out and try and get them into position. I just looked at him and said, "You hurry up. I don't care if this is your last game. Just get into position." And someone just captured that moment.
You're wasting my time, son.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone's time. Everyone's waiting for this game to kick off. Let's go.
And I guess that would be a common occurrence, right?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Cultural challenges are a big thing in Australia and New Zealand, and that's kind of our favourite time of the day whenever we're doing a kind of Pacific Test or a New Zealand International. Whenever there's a haka involved, that's always the most exciting bit leading into kick off, because they never go to time at all.
Never.
And there's nothing like being on the field and between two warring parties of 30 guys who want to rip each other's heads off, just kind of trying to get in the hurry up.
And there was one time where it was, I think, Tonga and Samoa, and either of them didn't want to go first. They had the respect for each other. So in the run sheet, and we chat to the football managers beforehand, you will go first, Samoa will go first, followed by Tonga. This one time they were out there, we were live on broadcast, and no one was moving. And broadcast looking at me going, "What's going on, Kylie-Ann?" I'm like, "I don't know." And so I had to run out and say, "Guys, hurry up." I mean, running onto the field when your broadcast is a no-no, but we had to make it happen. Be very stressful, that one.
Matt has an interesting question. As a floor manager, are you reporting to the broadcast team as well as the sports pres team? Is there a separate broadcast floor manager?
Yes, there's a separate broadcast floor manager who I would work with very closely, very, very closely. And if I see a story that I think is worthwhile for our big screen, our viewers in Stadia, I will then offer it up to broadcast as well and say, "Found this, it might be worth for broadcast as well." But we are constantly chatting to each other about time of day, where players are moving, what we want to put up on the big screen. If you don't want to see that, you may want to turn your cameras this way, or just things like that. But we're basically joined at the hip. The broadcast floor manager and sports press floor manager joined at the hip. Yeah.
Another question, which is kind of in line with that, is in terms of your troubleshooting and problem solving live, and how much is is there an an oversight on that in terms of giving feedback on whether that was good or bad, or is there guidelines or restrictions that you need to follow within that, and does anyone come up to you after it and say, that was really bad? Like, how does that work?
It really depends on the sport quite a lot, because in some sports it's really you are the last bastion of creative decisions. So you are the person who decides whether what is going to the screen is good or not. And in a situation where you've got to make up time or work on a problem, you are really the kind of be all and end all, and people give you that trust. And it differs from organisation to organisation. Sometimes there'll be a game day manager who'll kind of sit alongside you. But in the moment, because it's so last minute and there's never any rehearsals, you really have to make the decision and the call yourself and trust that your voice is the one that everyone's listening to, and you kind of have to take it upon yourself as the show caller to make it work. But then for other things, like for FIFA, Sam, I know it's a lot different in terms of what you're allowed to do and the interactions that you have with the organisational body.
Yeah, we were doing a grand final and we had an artist who was going to walk out on stage and do 2 songs, and they, quite rightly in his mind, took his sweet time getting out there and was doing all this with the crowd, and it added an extra 2 minutes to something we needed to time out to only whatever it was, and it just pushed everything back from there. And then we were going to acknowledge some retiring players, and broadcast trying to move things on, push one of the players out from the crowd that was going to get picked up from a shot as they walked down through the crowd. And of course, this person was just swamped by everybody. So we had all this content to get through, but no player because they were just not within shot because they were swamped by everybody. So you've just got to back yourself and have a trusted relationship with your client to not sit there and talk about it. Oh, so he's there and what's that? What are we going to do? You've got to make something up. And sometimes, most of the time you get it right. Sometimes you get it wrong, but in hindsight, you don't have time to talk about it, really.
And most people who are involved in sports pres would understand that it's what a choice you make, and you go with it, and it may work, and maybe it doesn't work, and there's really no blame associated with that, right? It's just like, did it work or didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, everyone will have a different opinion on what decision you ultimately made, but you know, you have to back yourself in sometimes and say, well, if the decision I made wasn't correct and we went this way, we would have had problems with the time in a different way. So I elected to still have the same problem but deal with it earlier. Like Josh, yeah.
And there's not much a better feeling than when you actually get it right. And when it all works perfectly, it is the best. Yeah, it is the best feeling ever. And I think because it's a one-off thing, right? Like it's a one-shot thing. You're not calling a show that you're working on that cue and just getting it in the perfect place every time. When you manage to nail a segment of sports pres or the lead up from a broadcast transition into something live, it's just the best feeling. And there's nothing like that. And I think that's one of the big reasons for me, at least, that I moved away from theatre, because I couldn't get that high anywhere else. There's nothing as stressful, but also as rewarding as doing it, you know, in front of an 80,000 people crowd and then live to 2 million, something like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Matthew has a great question. How are athlete injuries managed, and are there show stops? What are the relationships like athletes and stage or show callers in that situation in terms of an injury?
I mean, not a lot, really, to be perfectly honest. We kind of film what is going on within the sport, kind of manages that themselves. And the decisions that we make at that time is whether we cover the injury from a camera perspective and put it to screen, or whether it's something serious enough that we cut away from it, go to some other content, maybe some social media, maybe go down to some MCs on the side of the field and kind of distract from a serious injury on the field. We generally tend to try and capture at least a replay of what the injury was so that the crowd has an understanding of what's happened and why the game stopped. But then we probably tend to stay away from the kind of gory medical treatment scenario. And then we tend to come back for, if a player was being driven off on a card or something, you'd want to get the crowd involved and get the shot of them as they exit the stadium so everyone can applaud and kind of show their thanks to that person. So it's that's generally how it works in rugby league, at least, and a whole bunch of other sports. But there's different things for each sport again.
And what you've got to do is you've got to keep the crowd kind of informed but not entertained at that point, because we want to respect that there's an athlete getting medical treatment. So it's a bit of a tricky situation where you want to keep the vibe on edge, but you don't want to be celebratory or doing kiss cams and stuff like that while some poor guy's getting a brace on. So, yeah.
But that's interesting because you're essentially on that moment creating a narrative for the audience to experience, whether touching on the injury, acknowledging the beginning of it, how it happened, how they're going to leave the stadium, not getting detail in the goriness of the actual medical attention, but not ignoring it either. So there's that delicate balance where you're probably throwing content up and doing that. And that obviously, just to be clear, is all on the fly, right?
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. And then you're also at that point in time, if it's something that's happened during the first half of a game, or if you're doing a bunch of back-to-back games or something, you're then thinking about how is this time that we're now taking with this injury going to affect everything else that I've still got to get out the run sheet coming an hour and a half later, because the run sheets that we do for some of these games are down to the 15-second mark in terms of the stuff that we have to get out, and it's chock-a-block all through the day, and you just see them laying on the back and just get up. I need to get some ads out. Get up.
Exactly. So that's where the role of a show caller then comes into place, and then everyone has to trust the show caller, because if for sometimes you could be 8, 9 minutes, 10 minutes that you have to cut from your run sheet, and that 10 minutes is a whole heap of deliverables. So you have to trust the show caller that they are going to put the right things in spot and cut the right things. So a show caller then has to go, okay, everyone on comms, and there could be 30 people on comms, listen. Get your run sheets, listen once. This is what we're going to do. We have to cut this. We have to cut this. We have to move segment 121 up to here. This now becomes 2 minutes long. We have to do this. We have to do this. Everyone has to listen and trust and then go for it. And you have no other time to ask questions. You just have to go on the fly. And
that would be the norm for most, I'd say most games that we do. Some kind of conversation like that would happen every time.
Yeah. And it's really hard when you've got a floor crew that don't... some floor managers like to think that they've got their own ideas and stuff like that, but you have to put your trust into the show caller in that position.
There has to be a hierarchy, basically, and that it all does come down to the person controlling it from upstairs. And sometimes as the show caller, you might say to your vision switcher, just cover me for a moment while I work something out. You have a conversation with the client about what you're going to do. If you have time, and then you make the decision and go back to it from there.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, the floor manager's got the opportunity to offer up opportunities from the ground that they're seeing happening, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of the best stuff that we've ever done has come from KA seeing something on the side of the field and going, these guys are having a great time. They're all dressed up as nutters and they're pissed. Let's go and interview them. And then the stuff that comes off the back of that, that's a very Australian thing, to be fair. Yeah. But the stuff that comes off the back of that is more often than not better than anything you could script.
Yeah.
I want to give you 2 examples about... I just want to give you 2 examples. When at the Olympics, when the women won the rugby sevens gold medal, the people in front of me, you can't see the people in front of you, but apparently all the Australians had signs up, I am, you are, we are Australian. And I never saw that until I saw photos afterwards. I'm like, I wish my floor manager had told me. I would have played that song, and that part of the crowd would have known that we saw them, and it would have been an amazing Olympic moment where all the Australians were singing. I mean, I know I'm biased, but it would have been incredible. The other one was there was an injury where the captain of Fiji was taken off in a game versus Wales, and they ended up winning after the siren, and they brought the captain out on the medical Guernsey to do a lap of honour with the team in front of the Fijians. So sometimes the stuff that is unscripted is the best stuff, because people it's happening, it's evolving as you speak, and you've just got to go with it.
And really get it on the floor. You've got to have eyes everywhere. You've got to think outside the box, and that's when some of your best segments come from.
Absolutely.
Do you have a bunch of content that's kind of sitting on the side to throw in as you need, rather than outside the actual run sheet in case you run into trouble?
Not really.
Yes.
No, I mean, sometimes we've got like overlays and crowd overlays and stuff that we can use, some kind of like content for that. But more often than not, we don't really have like a standby MC segment that we could go to that has just in case sequence. At least from my
sometimes you'll have you might have a 2-minute package or something that you might have up your sleeve that you can play. With cricket that I do, I know that there's certain things. If I was sitting at home watching cricket, and if I knew that the ball speed, how would that happen? So I would write down a few things, notes before the day would start, of little things that I can touch on if there is a rain delay or if anything like that I can then go to. So always thinking about what other people would. Don't just assume that everyone knows what's going on. You've got to tell them, you've got to explain to them how the hotspot works in cricket, how this works in cricket, how that works in rugby league. Don't assume anything.
Speaking of rain delays, I have a lovely video from Josh. Tell me about this thing. I want to play it.
We love rain delays.
Yeah, rain delays are the best.
Oh.
So you really get a good understanding when you work in sports pres about how music really changes the feeling of a crowd. And it's much more than I ever got doing musicals, I think, because it's so kind of poppy and so in the moment. But if you play the right song at the right time, it can really make a huge difference. So this was a game, the Big Bash League a couple of years ago, which is a kind of exciting, fast-paced cricket version. It's kind of like if you took baseball and only had 3 innings and made it, way more flashy and exciting, is essentially what Big Bash is. And so the crowds are always kind of up for a good time. They're really keen to get involved in the cricket, and when there's rain delay, we try and keep them as involved as possible. So there's a couple of classic songs which always work for stadiums, and this is probably one of the good ones.
All right, let's show it.
Yeah.
Rain delays, love them.
Rain delays, yeah. So, and we kind of did that for about 25 minutes before we actually got back to the action. And some of the people said it was one of the better games they've been to in the year because it was just kind of so joyous in the crowd.
Yeah.
I did a rain delay one, and that was also cricket as well. I can't remember which stadium it was, but the umpires stopped play. But during the day, it was rain delay, but then they stopped playing. It wasn't raining. The crowd's going, what's going on? It's not raining. Why have they stopped? And we found out, so it was my role to then run over to find out why have you stopped play, and it was bad lighting. So they had to stop play for that. So then our MC had to, then tell the crowd it was because of bad lighting. That's why they had to stop. And then our MC and we thought on the fly, oh, okay, so bad lighting. How about everyone get their torches and put it on? So then all of a sudden, everyone in the stadium putting their torches on, and then you could see people in the corporate boxes. The umpires put their phones out as well because then they were waiting in the sheds, and television crew putting their torches on. It was just thinking on the fly, being spontaneous, and it worked an absolute treat. Everyone got involved. It was really good.
That's super funny.
So think on the fly for rain delays, you do.
Oh, that's great.
I actually love a good rain delay.
Yeah.
That's when you get to be creative.
Yeah.
Like, what can we do
here? Yeah.
There's a question in the thread, and there's a lot of questions coming in, so I just want to touch on this one because I think it's an interesting one. In what form are you guys employed? Do you get employed by the rugby? Do you get employed as a freelance, or does an entity employ you? How's the conduit to working on these gigs happen for you guys?
For me personally, I've got my own company. So I have a company that is providing showcaller services for gigs. So whether that be a corporate gig or a sporting team. So I contract, my company contracts out directly to usually the governing body or the club. And that's how I get involved in sports pres. But in saying that, I think that's quite an Australasian thing. I think in the States it works quite differently in terms of a club will have their stadium guys and their team, and they work in their venue, and it will be very insular in terms of I am the Chicago Bulls show caller and that's all I do. Whereas for us it's a lot more open, and one week I'll be calling a rugby league game, the next week I might be water polo, but it's all very we kind of specialize in terms of the show calling and then hire out that speciality to different organizations rather than working for a team. But there are people who work for clubs, and I know, KA, you work for a couple of clubs regularly and stuff as well.
Yes, so I'm a freelancer, so I contract out to a couple of the different clubs, contract to Cricket Australia, contract to event agencies. So same to Josh.
And you, Sam?
Yeah, I'm the same. I refined the craft through one company that I worked for many years, and then became a freelancer. And sometimes I'll work directly for the club. Sometimes I work directly for their club's provider. Sometimes I work for the federation, the people who are in charge of the sport. So I'll work for everybody basically.
Yeah, it depends what sport it is.
Yeah.
A very good question in terms of getting the sports pres is how much do you, and especially for you maybe, Josh, because you jump around between sports, how much do you need to know about the sport when you're calling it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because often I have gone into sports where I don't know a lot at all and learnt the basics of what I need in a couple of meetings, and then taken what I know about how it works for other sports and other scenarios and applied that to that particular sport. And it's really just the specifics of the sport that you kind of need to know in terms of their relationship with sports pres. For example, athletics. Athletics is a bit of a tricky one because you've got maybe 5 different events, 6 different events that are happening at the same time within one kind of field of play within the stadium itself. So whether you're focusing on a sprint that's about to happen, you need to realize that you need to be quiet for the start of that race, or if you're focusing on the discus, which is happening on the other side, and you're drawing people's attention to that. It's really about knowing when you have to be quiet, when you have to amp people up, and when you just need to kind of go along with the flow. So you kind of can pick it up and apply your general knowledge of sport to any kind of sport. And I've done stuff from, the things that work for rugby league will also work for a car racing competition, or will work for Olympic diving. You just need to know the details of it.
And in the unknown, if you do not know, are you then therefore maybe a little bit more cautious as you navigate that till you build your confidence?
Yeah, I think you are, and you definitely lean on the specific the people who have the specific knowledge of the sport as well. So the governing bodies and about how you work with them.
Great.
It can be tricky too because I was in New Zealand for the Rugby World Cup 2011 and. Everybody in New Zealand loves their rugby. They've been doing it for years. So you go into a venue and they have a very clear idea of how they do it and how they want to do it for the Rugby World Cup. And so you don't want to introduce big new ideas straight away. But by their 3rd or the 4th match, when you've just slowly changed things over time, they go, yes, this is fantastic and we'll be doing this ourselves. And that the same as when you go into a new sport. They know the sport better than you do, and they generally are open to ideas, but you've got to find your time to test those new ideas. You don't want to do it at the grand final or some of the top tier matches. It's better to test it earlier in the morning or maybe on a match that there might not be so many eyeballs watching, so that if it doesn't go right, it's not the end of the world.
Another interesting question is how far advanced do you get booked work? Do you get booked out for a season with certain clubs, etc.? How does that work?
Yeah, so me personally, I get booked for the season, for NRL clubs, for cricket, for the whole season, yes. And then occasionally you'll get your one-off jobs that you slot in between all your seasonal stuff.
So your weekends are always taken up?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Just before this coronavirus hit, I was looking at the calendar going, I don't think I'm going to have 2 days off in a row for a while. And all of a sudden, I've got like 6 months off.
Yeah. And the juggle is always pretty crazy, especially in Australia. We all, multiple times a year, we'll call each other and go, hey, I can't do this Saturday. Can you come and do this game so I can go over here and do this? And it's kind of, there's a small group of us, at least in this country, who kind of bounce stuff off each other. And you try and work your calendar, but it's always the way. It's 5 things on one day and nothing for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. Need more people in the industry then, maybe, Josh.
That's right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've seen quite a lot of questions coming up on the side about how to break into the industry as well, and I don't have a great answer for it because my path was kind of fortuitous. I met some people through theatre who were also working in sports pres, and I just asked to come along and watch one day because I'd never seen a game before. And I mean, I'd love sport myself, but I just wanted to see what it was like to be in the control room, and kind of came along and watched. I was really lucky to have someone who kind of sat next to me and showed me the ropes and kind of talked me through what the process was. And then 2 weeks later, I was on my first match because they couldn't do something and they needed someone to swing in for them. And I was ready to give it a go. So I gave it a crack and then that was it.
Yeah, I think that essentially, like, if you've got those skills of a showcaller or a stage manager or a floor manager, like you say, then it's about, volunteering yourself up and getting yourself in the arena so people know about you, right? And then
Absolutely.
And then saying, yeah, I can do that. And also understanding the context, because there's no way I'd want to throw myself into managing a big, Rugby World Cup when you've never done it before. You want to see it and like you said before, circulate around that role before you step up into that pole position and feel confident that you're going to manage it effectively.
I think it's a big advantage.
I like the other question. Another. Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
I think it's a big advantage that us three have, and yourself, Anna, because I know you'll want to try sports eventually, is that there is a bit of an art to stage management and calling, and sometimes in clubs and sporting federations, they've come to show calling through either what they think they've seen on TV, or it's something they've learned off somebody else, but they haven't actually learnt the craft of show calling. Now, I show call differently when I'm doing sports pres than when I do a normal show. For instance, it's much more of a TV type of call. Mm-hmm. There's no right and wrong way. You've got to call very much to the way that your operators expect it. But rather than, lighting cue, auto and fly, wait, go, you're really being reactive to what's going on and getting it there as quick as possible, because sometimes you don't know that a try is going to be scored very shortly. It just happens, and you've got to get things done quickly. You've got to get that content out and rolling and responding to what's going on. So the problem for me as a stage manager when I transitioned from theatre to sport was actually calling the way that the operators were used to, so that I could get the most out of them. So I would just say that as a stage manager in theatre, you've got the tools you need. You just need to understand the different language pack that you're going into, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these games can be quite. I know AFL goes for 2 hours long, right? So this isn't a long period. So there's a couple of questions about the actual. How do you keep yourself from getting distracted or staying invested in the game? And, what about practicalities like going to the bathroom and...
Josh, what about
have to run?
Yeah, the nines is probably that's an interesting one to talk about. So there's the NRL tournament, which is here, the NRL nines, which runs a series of shorter. It's a condensed version of the game. So it runs for 9 minutes and a half, 7 minutes, 9 minutes and a half, wasn't it?
9 minutes.
Yeah. And throughout a day, we'll probably play 25, 30 matches. But in that day, you are sitting down to start rehearsals at 8 a.m. in the morning, and you're probably getting up from your chair at 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Nice.
And
Do you have a picture of that?
No, I don't actually have a...
I sent through one with me show calling the rugby, the World Nines.
Is this one?
Yeah. So you're sitting in the seat for, as Josh said, 8 a.m. in the morning till you'll get up at 10 p.m. at night. You can't drink water because, although I've got a water bottle there, but you don't have time to go to the toilet.
Yeah, there are some times where you just have to go. Weirdly, in most of the sports that I tend to do, once the actual sport is on, that's when you get to sit back a little bit and take a break, because there is something else entertaining the crowd at that point in time. And especially in an oval ball sport where you've got a rugby league or a rugby, something like that, or cricket, you generally have probably a series of 3 or 4 minutes where it's just sport and you can run off to the bathroom, and if someone needs to play a track of music, it's not the end of the world if you're not there for that. So you kind of you tend to manage as best you can, but they're massively long days. And if there was a union for sports pre-show callers, it would be hilarious and it never work. No 1 hour breaks in those days. Oh no.
With another one I saw, which is an interesting question, is it up to the show caller? The choice of song in that Sweet Caroline, is that your choice, or is that a discussion? Who decides on what kind of music gets thrown out?
Depends on your DJ.
Okay.
A lot depends on your DJ, I reckon. Like some games I'll go to, I work with a fantastic DJ here in Sydney called Evan Ferris, who's been doing that for years. And his ability to listen to a crowd and know what to play at the right time is second to none. So I'll just trust him with everything. But other venues you might go into where you don't have as strong a DJ, or if you've just got a music playback source that you're running yourself, you tend to pick up along the way some good tracks that kind of work for all situations. I know Sam's got a library of thousands of bangers.
But then also,
I listen to music during the year and I go, oh, that piece of music would be great if this happened, and so I just had that ready.
Last year, mental track. Yeah.
The lights went out at a cricket match I was doing last year or the year before, and I started playing Nilly Furtado, Turn Off the Lights, and everyone thought that was the funniest thing ever, but I'd been planning for that to happen for months.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for a lights out moment.
Waiting for it. Yeah.
Every time it starts raining, whenever I'm doing a game that has a rain delay, it's always Dragon, don't go out in the rain, because it just works.
Yeah.
But also the floor manager's role, or if they're out, and they're looking for things. If, for instance, at the cricket, if you see a whole heap of people dressed as Mario Brothers, you then say to the show caller, got Marios, can you get the DJ to find the Mario Brothers track? Or there's a whole heap of people with Hawaiian shirts. Can we play Wipeout? So you've got to have your vision on the field as well, and produce and then tell the show caller to ask a DJ. You then got to explain to the cameras what you want to do with the cameras and audio on the field. So if you've got a vision, you've got to let everyone know what your vision is to then have that segment deliver the right way.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it is fun.
Is there roles, again, pathways into the industry and also layers of these responsibilities? Is there an assistant floor manager? Are there assistant roles leading into what you guys do that people could start by doing first?
I was KA's assistant for the last cricket season, so.
Right. Yes, you're a very good one, Sam. Very good.
I definitely think that's like the best place to start is being on the floor. Because it's a little bit less. There are roles on the floor that aren't so crucial, and you can kind of ask people advice and people who've been doing it before, and you kind of can and find your way in, or kind of work with someone side by side and kind of shadow them. But just being able to hear everything that's going on in comms and being able to see what it's like on the floor is super important, I think, because you don't ever then understand the crowd reactions if you're only ever seeing it from the box. It's kind of isolating being in the control room sometimes, and Kay has got a better feel for how the game's going on the floor, so I trust her in terms of what she's seeing a lot, and that's a good place to start out.
And generally, if I'm working with KA, I'll set up the next segment for her to bring over the talent and the camera crew, and then she'll manage that one while I go to the next one and make sure that's all ready to go. So especially in a big field play like cricket, or even any football field, if you're doing segments all around, you don't have time to set everything up yourself. You need a team of people to meet them at the right door, get them accreditation, get them wristbands on, get them into the dressing rooms, then brief them to get them out to rehearsal, for then the floor manager to take over and offer it up to the screen. So yes, there's a huge amount of people other than just those key roles to kind of just get the machinations going back of house.
Interesting. Another question along the lines here is there a technical director in this situation, and how does that work? Or is there a technical person that is heading up this as well as you guys? Is there any other roles in the theatrical realm that pass over into sports pres?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, because those roles, when you're working in a venue, are usually taken up by venue staff. So you'll have someone from the venue who is in charge of the control room, and they know how their control room works and the switches and their audio gear and everything else that goes along with it. But if you are working for an events company that's providing the services, you're bringing all that stuff in with you. So in those situations, you definitely would have a technical director. I know that like Olympics and stuff, Sam, you've got a TD that comes along and kind of sets out all that stuff as well.
Yeah, it's a little strange at the Olympics because they're putting on a tournament as opposed to just a match. So, for instance, our venue technical manager was in charge of everyone's printers and laptops and the speakers, so that if the broadcasts were complaining that the speakers were too loud, where they were doing mix zone stuff, I had no control over that because that was done by the venue technology manager. So, it's different in every scenario and for every match and for every venue. But yeah, you need to know enough about different things that you can have the conversation about why things may not be working. But there's definitely a very big technical component that should have the system up and running long before you get there, basically.
Yeah. So with cricket, we have technical directors and broadcast engineers that travel with us, but they tend to go in match day -3, -2, and then we would then turn up match day -1. And then technical director, if anything goes wrong, straight on the comms to the technical director. And I can see Tim ask that question. Hi, Tim. Tim O'Neill.
Shout outs.
Yeah, there's a few people on there we know, I think.
Yeah.
The other good question is now going into the personal. Do you ever encounter burnout given the fact that you are there all day, and how do you care for yourselves in big long days and sessions where you're doing a big long season like that?
Suck it up, princess.
Look, I use humour to keep me going. I think when you've got to be there all day, you can't be super serious about it all day, and I think you're more switched on when your energy is positive. So sometimes I'll actually get distracted and unfocused and start making jokes about stuff so I can then switch back on. Basically, you can't stay on the whole day. I think that's very important to keeping going. Other times, like at the Olympics, you were in early, coming home late, and you've just got to keep going. You don't have that option. You've just got to keep going. And particularly if you're at the top of a team and they see that energy, then they're not going to respond to what's going on or what's available as well. So you've actually just got to keep yourself going in whatever way you can.
It's a different kind of stamina as well, I think, because if you're doing a long run theatre show, your stamina for, you know when you show up to work, you know what your day is going to be, you know how kind of structure your energy throughout a day. Whereas if you're doing kind of the peaks and lows are a lot higher in sports pres. Like you build up at the end of the day, you do this, the kind of final ceremony or whatever the presentation is, and then you're done and you tick that one off and you move on. So I think there's something really cathartic about finishing a show, forgetting it, ripping up your run sheet and moving on to the next thing. And when that is, you might be the next day, you might be coming back and doing the same thing again, but it's a fresh day and a fresh start. And I think for me, one of the most important things, I think probably why I keep getting work is that the thing I focus on the most is how calm I am. And how that applies through my voice to the team, because really when and everyone knows when you're on comms and it's stressful, the difference in tone of voice is probably the most crucial thing to everyone's enjoyment of the day. And if you're providing it for everybody, then it's actually it gives you a lot of energy back, getting people's enthusiasm coming back as well. So that's kind of how I deal with it.
Oh, it's really interesting. And I think actually from the people that I do know in this realm, they are some of the hardest working people that I've ever met in my life, honestly. And, just those long, arduous days is just it's so intense. And you have to really like the job, I think, to want to jump into this realm, right?
Yes. And if you're doing a tournament, once that day finishes, you leave the stadium, then you've actually got to go back to the hotel room and finish the run sheet for the next day, the MC scripts. Then you have to print them and, start all over again for the next day. So it actually doesn't stop if you're at a tournament or, like, for instance, like a 4-day tournament, it doesn't stop because you can't you can have your basis of your run sheets done before you get to the venue, but then things change, you need commercial deliverables change and all that sort of stuff. But then you go back to the hotel room 11 o'clock at night, and then you're working to 2 o'clock in the morning, doing the final run sheets, getting that out to everyone to broadcast so they know what's going on. The MC scripts, because that can be 30, 40 pages long. And then you get on site at 8 o'clock the next morning. Hey, everyone, here we are.
Hi, here we are. You're not selling it, KA. It's arduous.
There's another question about, again, personal, I know, Josh, you have a daughter, and Sam, you have some kids too, right? I'm not sure about you, KA, but so how do you deal with the parenthood as well as this kind of career?
Yeah.
I wound back a little bit when my kids were young, and even as recently as the Winter Olympics in what year are we in Sochi, I was asked to go, but I elected not to because both of the kids were starting in new schools. So it's that balance between getting the work because you want to provide for the family versus spending time with the family. That's what I'm really enjoying at the moment, is being able to go home from my work here at the school and get home in time. But I'm also looking forward to getting out again as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it can be quite hard because the first kind of 6 months of my daughter's life I was away for. So I saw her born and then was there for the first month, and then I essentially disappeared for 6 months on a bunch of different tours, and I was maybe home for a couple of days here in between. And it was really hard. It was super difficult. But it's one of those things that this kind of work, you take it when it's there. And you try and juggle the best you can with your personal life, and you try and give yourself some breaks every now and then to get away with the family. But I think that what it's made me appreciate is when I do get home, that all I do is family time. It's
quality time.
Completely switch off work, and you are with them 100%. And when you're away, you're working 100%. And it's a very A and B kind of relationship for me, at least. When I'm home, I'm home.
And my kids are 18 and 20, so they're like mini adults now. But when they were younger, I couldn't travel. I had to sort of state and do like day trips. But now they're older. I've been sort of traveling with work for probably 7 years, or probably 10 years now. And, you know, we make it work. You just have to. With your husband at home, he's in the same sort of industry as well. So you just make it work, you know.
Yeah. I always think it's just another added facet to your life that you have to incorporate, another thing to manage, you know, make time for that and put value and time into that, as well as your career. And there's always a way, you know. I think that's also becoming a little bit more, I say in the areas that I work, a little bit more accepted that there needs to be some kind of balance in life rather than just being all in, especially as you get older. Yeah,
for sure.
Unions, we don't really have unions in Australia, right? So I know that it's a kind of a big thing in America and the UK in terms of support and structure for people working in the industry. But I'm right in the fact that Australia doesn't have a lot of support in regards to that. And what do you think of the positives and negatives of that?
Look, when I was stage managing, I was right across the awards for the Live Theatre and Concert Award, the Musicians Award, and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, your job as the stage manager is to make sure everyone's getting treated fairly, they're not going into overtime and all that kind of stuff. And so when I came to events as a legacy of that, there were questions asked about, if I'm doing a job on a Saturday but I can't get a flight home till Sunday and it's a 6-hour flight, technically that's a work day. And sometimes I was told that, well, no, that's your own time. Well, that's not quite right. So you just have to, I think, set those boundaries fairly early and make sure that you understand what's expected of you, and vice versa, that there's an expectation around what you can and can't provide around travel days for different things. I think when you talk about how many hours you're going to work in a day, well, I think when you're freelancing and you're on a sporting event, the event might go from anywhere, like a tennis match, go from women's tennis and go for 40 minutes to a 8-hour day at the cricket. I think it's if you're there at all, you're there for the day, basically. So you work around that.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. The day rate thing is you pay for my day and I'll do whatever you need to do within the day. I know in terms of, for me, not being part of a union, and especially being in Australia and New Zealand, it means growing up in theatre in New Zealand, I have to know everything. I have to know how to operate a lighting desk in a pinch. I have to know how to use a sound desk. I have to know the elements of everyone else's jobs, because there are certain times where I'll walk into a venue and I'll be the DJ and the showcaller at the same time, and I'll have to run a whole bunch of other stuff. But for me, it's a much more valuable thing to have to know about that stuff, because I think it makes you a more valuable person to know how someone else works and then incorporate that into your workflow. So for us, I think we're really lucky that we're forced to do a whole bunch of different stuff, because I think that doing that different stuff makes you a better rounded stage manager in total. And it means that you can swing from doing, you know, the Actors Awards one day to the Commercial Radio Awards the next day to the Grand Final of the Rugby League the day after that, and use those same skills across everything you've learnt without having to specialise. Being a specialist, non-specialist, I guess.
I've got a funny story about that. I was working at the 2015 Pacific Games in Papua New Guinea, and I was doing indoor volleyball. Josh was up there with me. He was doing another sport, and I had to manage two courts, a broadcast court and a non-broadcast court. Anyway, so I had, there was DJs, floor managers, there was announcers, and one morning, one whole team decided to not show. I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting, and it was a broadcast one. So I then had to remove myself from one of the courts and run over to the other court. I had to be the DJ, I had to be the announcer, I had to be the floor manager, all in one. And trying to then be the announcer and then do the team lineups of these two national teams with names like this.
Yeah.
And I'm just making it up on the fly while pressing the music and cueing the teams on, and the players are running onto the field just looking at me going, that is not my name. I'm like, I
know it's not your name, I'm just giving it a crack, yeah.
I had to be like 4 roles in one, and oh my God, everyone was laughing their heads. I had a great time.
That's fantastic. Yeah, so I do think that's one of the interesting skill sets in terms of working this side of the world, is that it's you do have to be very multifaceted and that sort of thing. I want to step back a little bit to maybe a picture that I've got of yours, Josh, because there is some presentation performance element of the game, the pre-show stuff. So we've talking mostly about the actual execution of the events and the shows and the presentation for the games itself. Then you've got potentially this whole pre-show celebration thing, and is that another facet? And how does that come together in short? What is this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the rehearsal for retiring players for the NRL Grand Final from a couple of years ago, I think. So this is the elements of staging that go into the pre-show entertainment. So, for example, probably the best thing that most of the folks from the States sort of understand is the Super Bowl show, the Super Bowl halftime show. So we do a very stripped down version of that. We don't do it at halftime, we do it pre-game. So whereas you would have maybe that scenario for the Super Bowl be one team would do the sports pres for the stadium, then there'd be a whole separate halftime show team that would come in and run that system, and it would be separate and geared to broadcast. We tend to do both. So we look after everything running into this and then the execution of this as well. So with us, specifically for the NRL, we kind of have a production wing as well when we start doing the bigger games. So there's a sports pres side, and then there's a production team who does all the staging, lighting, sound on the field. So we do a full venue overlay of additional bits and pieces for that. So a lot of lead content, a lot of speakers, and they all are run out in that traditional kind of Super Bowl halftime show thing where we'd run it all out within probably 10 minutes time and get everything set up. And then we would run the rehearsals for that as well. So this is some, I think, junior players, or I'm not too sure, but basically it's people that we get in to run. These are flag carriers, and then we've got people in front of that as well. So KA is probably down there somewhere, letting people know what we need them to do. And then we're running rehearsals the day before the match as well for the anthem and for that section with the players. And then the stage behind is the entertainment. So I think that year it was a couple of bands. It was Richie Savapora, I think, wasn't it? It was Slash or someone, or was Slash and a couple other people. So we run with the production team that those rehearsals and those calls as well. So it's very much that kind of stuff feels a bit more like a theatre show and a bit more like a stadium ceremony. And then you've also just got to realise that you've also, on the back of doing this show that lasts for 20 minutes and is quite complicated in terms of its queuing, you've also got another 7 hours of other kind of sports pre-show call that you've got to do as well at the same time. So, but yeah, and the things that we do here range from a very simple stage for a post-match presentation to something that is more complicated than that. I mean, Kaya's got a lot more experience in terms of that stuff on the floor. And
this one here?
That is the pre-match opening for the Asian Cup in Melbourne in 2016 or something, I think.
Amy,
Amy. So this was, again... this one was actually a little bit different. So I came in just to call the opening ceremony for this section. So that was working with someone who was doing the sports pres before and after, and me just slotting in and basically taking over comms for a half-hour section in the middle where we did a mass kind of choreography dance thing. I think it was wasn't Katy Perry. It was someone of that kind of ilk. In terms of the performance, and then that was mostly the broadcast. So that was the kind of opening ceremony for the tournament. and the game at the same time.
How much rehearsal time do you get for that sort of segment prior to the live event?
That one, it depends really. I think for this we had some offsite rehearsals for a couple of weeks in terms of choreography and getting that stuff right. And then in terms of field time, it's always so precious. We hardly ever get any time to work on the field because the groundskeeper's main job is to make the match ready, make the pitch ready for the match. And when we want to put our staging on there and roll, 4 ton of wheels over it, they really don't love that too much.
I like that.
It's
communication's a key there between venue and the production team.
Exactly. But it's not uncommon for us to only have a 45-minute block where we're allowed to access the field and get that rehearsal done the day before, and that's the only chance we get. And sometimes it's on the day of the match, so we'll come in early and do some pre-rehearsal. But it's always time on the field is crucial, and how you use it is the most important part of the day in terms of rehearsal time, for sure.
So I've just come off the Cricket World Cup here in Australia, and we had Katy Perry performing at the final match. We had 80,000 people. I think there were 74 million people watching. But we were very lucky because all of our semi-finals were in other states. So we had the time at the MCG to have -3 match day for Katy Perry to come in for a couple of days because her staging was huge, and we had to work around the curators and the wicket. And so we were very lucky we had 2 to 3 days with that build and rehearsal time for that one.
So always a lot of variables.
A lot of variables. Depending gigs, depending what's on the field to play, everything.
Yeah, and the weather.
Rains as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's always the unknown factor to deal with, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we've got about just under 15 minutes left, so I'm going to do like the rapid fire questions are the ones that we have on the right. So let's throw this out. Let's see if we can get through as many as we can before we finish this session. A good one from Laura. Hi, Laura. As a floor manager, how do you designate different areas of the stage and field? What's the language that you use? KA, maybe you can answer that one.
Good question.
Yeah. With floor managing and stuff like that, and with the audience, I'll always share the love, making sure that you get around to the different areas of the field. I don't like to do a show where the MCs are positioned in one area, because I find if you go over the other side of the field, you get to engage with that crowd a little bit more. So I'll always then position different segments and around the stadium that way.
But do you refer it to north, south, east, west? Do you?
Yes, north, south, the eastern grandstand, western grandstand, correct.
And vomitories as well, Vom 1, Vom 2. You use kind of place markers around the place. And it's usually camera left and camera right rather than stage left and stage right. I tend to not use stage left and stage right at all in sports press scenarios because no one really understands it, or it doesn't have a practical use.
Yeah.
Or you can even get as specific as saying, because we can all see the signage for where the seats are. We're going over to section 217. We're going to do it in front of 217. So everyone knows exactly where we're going to go. And
so you generally have a map in the control room, I'm sure, just to sort of know the zones and stuff as well. Yeah.
So with the Cricket World Cup, I sat down with the floor crew before we went out onto the field and said, okay, we've got these segments. This is where we'd like to do these particular segments. We'll come out from Vom 5 for this particular one. So I'd get a floor manager to then go over and set up in that particular area. And then you brief your cameras to say, camera left, someone will come in camera left of the screen. So that's a language that we use, and you just got to pre-plan and make sure everyone's on the same page as you. And
for people who may work in theatre that are watching sport, there's generally a camera 1 side. So broadcast will have basically their camera 1 on the halfway position of a field of play. And that's where everything is orientated from for basically the VIPs. Everyone sits on that side. So generally you're doing everything to the camera 1 side as opposed to the reverse shot from the other side. So that's kind of where you orientate towards when you're in a rectangular stadium at least.
Interesting. So, Josh, did you were you able to pull up a run sheet?
Yeah. So I've got something here. This is, let me see if I can do it.
It's the little square at the top of the screen.
Hold on, I've just got to allow some, everyone's got to allow everything else.
Yanni is listening to us, Josh and KA, about whether we use online or printed run sheets. I'm more of a printed run sheet kind of a fan. I know there's pluses and minuses for it, but I much prefer it on paper because the internet isn't great everywhere you go.
And I have moved over now to be exclusively iPad with a paper backup. So I use a PDF annotation program as well as a little timer program that I have and do a split screen thing. So I'm now pretty much all iPad. So this is KA's lovely run sheet, actually, from the 2019 Grand Final. Yeah, exactly. So this is... it's probably worthwhile preferencing that everything is very Excel based or some kind of spreadsheet program in SportsPress. So you get to know how to use Excel reasonably well, and you get to be a bit of a wizard. It's very rare that you would see a SportsPress run sheet that was made in anything else, although some clubs will love to make a Word version of a run sheet, which I just hate more than life itself. Because it's
Gosh, that came out loud.
Yeah, because it's always referencing time of day. All the calculations of time are really important. So you tend to structure yourself into a spreadsheet because you then are forced to get it right. And if you accidentally lose time or gain time, it does happen. It can be quite hilarious. But essentially, it's all columns. So you can see at the top of the sheet here. Kaya, do you want to talk through it?
Yeah, you're doing a very good job.
So it's essentially a column, so item number, which is always really important for us to reference because Act 1, Scene 2 is our item number 35. It gives people an easy way to find out what we're talking about. Then it's the time of day in the column next to it. Then duration, duration being very important to know how long you've got in each segment. Then the activity of what we're actually doing, and then within that we then break it down to the elements of production and what are needed. So you can see, for example, at line number 32, it's a music build and hype crowd, which is essentially our way of saying we're playing music and waiting for something to happen. But within that, we've got the DJ playing hype music. The ground announcer will be talking to the crowd about getting them involved and getting them ready for the match to start. Cameras are looking for crowd shots, and we're then taking broadcast shots of the dressing room as well. So we're cutting that to screen. But that stuff changes as well throughout what's in them. You'll move down to a game, and then you've got flames for tries and goals. You've got graphics for stats and match day graphics as well. And then, then there's a detail column on the right-hand side with just more detail for everyone to know about that specific line item.
And some notes for the crew.
Yeah,
I'm a big believer to put a lot of detail in a run sheet, so they minimises a lot of questions during the show.
And there's probably worth mentioning just here, there's red times as well. So there's certain times where we'll run off time of day, and there's certain times we'll run off how much time we have in a half time. So as to, you'll work the time of day the match kickoff, and when you get the half time, you'll then start a countdown timer from 13 minutes in this case, and then everything will have a minus time to know how far through half time you are and what you've got to speed up or slow down to get there at the end.
Interesting.
Yeah, sometimes that's called the zero time. So especially if the time of day that the match is going to start is still being worked out with broadcast, but you know that at minus 40 minutes, they're going to start their broadcast. So they need the levels brought down because they're doing a segment from the field of play. You know that no matter what time the game starts, that they're going to come in at minus 40. So that's what they've got denoted there in red, that it's a minus time that goes to a zero time when we all have a common time that we agree that we're starting.
Yeah.
And then within that, everyone will make their own notes on their own versions. That the hardest thing for us is always version control, because as you can see, this is version 8. We probably would have got to version 11 before the actual day. So everyone kind of gets a new version on game day, and then has to transfer their notes across. So that can be a bit of a process sometimes, which is probably why. This is another document that I tend to use quite a bit. This is kind of my run sheet that I make for. Everything else that sits outside of the SportsPress, it doesn't really change. So for this is the kind of the show elements for the grand final that I know once we lock into this 20-minute run, then we've got this stuff to get out within 20 minutes. And I kind of change this up for myself. No one ever else actually sees this apart from me, but I turn this into more of a theatrical look that I'm comfortable with because I know what I'm looking for and I know how to make that work for a show. So sometimes I'll do a mix of both, and sometimes you can get a run sheet that looks quite different to this as well. I saw a question about what applications I use. Google Sheets is the best thing to make rundowns in for me now because you can share it. a lot of people still use Excel. And then on the day, I use a program called PDF Expert Pro on an iPad, which does annotations and lets you search through your notes, lets you cut and move stuff in PDFs, which is really good. And then I use a timer application I've made for myself in FileMaker, because I'm a FileMaker developer as well. So I use that to work out the times and how much duration I've got left and how long I've been doing something counting up. So that's a really important thing for me in terms of applications and software.
Great. About you guys too, do you use anything other than what Josh has spoken about in terms of software?
I'm an Excel guy. I love Excel. It's like Lego. But yeah, I tend to build it in Excel and then publish it on Google Sheets so that it becomes kind of live to everybody. There's a couple of great applications like Showflow, which I think they're better suited to club matches where they might have 11 home games rather than unique matches. I think they take a long time to set up and are better to use when you're running them, but it can take a long time to set up. I did a job for one company and they wanted everything on Google Sheets. Then I did a job for Google and they wanted everything on Excel. So you've got to adapt basically to who your client is and what you need it for and your operators.
Yeah, I think it's funny that like because of the volatility and the changes, you just need something that you can work easily and fast with, really, isn't it? When you're on game day and communicating that effectively. So sometimes with some of those softwares that are custom built, they're not exactly the most efficient process for the particular application that you're using, and that's where you can have some hiccups if you're trying to use a new software. So you have to. I always say to people, it's whatever works for you best, right? Whatever you know well, and whatever you can work the fastest.
Whatever you trust,
yeah. I'm with you too, Josh. I've started to do some stuff on like calling from a laptop or from a digital device, but you always have the printout next to you.
Always have backup. Yeah, exactly. I just don't trust it that much. But the best thing about it is that I can now go back and find a run sheet that I did 4 years ago and look at my notes and understand what happened in a certain segment, or remember an operator's name, which is probably the most helpful thing for me. Like, hey, Tom.
Lisa has a good they're called globally, or is there other titles for that?
There's other titles. I was going to say I work for an American company and they call their run sheet a script, and they also like the ground announcers actual text in there as well, which makes the whole thing a bit, for me, unreadable, but that's the way they do it. I think generally it's somewhere in between TV and theatre. So I call myself a showcaller, but almost I'm like a big screen television director. That's what I tell people that I do if they don't understand what the difference is as a showcaller. I mean, as a stage manager, you might be doing a deck plot or in the office or show calling. It's 3 different roles on the day. So we kind of had the same language in Australia, but then what those responsibilities actually entail really comes down to who you're working with on the day.
Yeah. Go back to screen so we can see each other in the last question.
It was me.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Now, a couple of questions have come through the thread just before we finish. In terms of training and that, I don't know if there's any training available for this kind of work. Is there? If so, where is it? And how do you get experience apart from what we've spoken about in terms of practical jumping into assistant roles, etc.?
That's a really good question. I don't know of any.
I don't know of any either.
No, I taught it a little bit when I was teaching stage management at QUT, but it's not really been picked up by any universities as even a unit or, certainly a diploma or a master's or anything like it. It's very vocational at the moment is what I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The best thing I could ever recommend to someone is try and understand who is running the venue that your favorite team might be playing for, and then try and just get in with them and just say, can I come along and watch? Can I just come along and sit and see how it works? And just learning by osmosis is really how this job happens.
Or even just getting a set of headsets and listening somewhere outside of the control room just to hear the language of what's going on before a segment actually happens to screen. You'll understand the complexity that's going on behind getting something even to screen.
Yeah, and the pace of it and the protocols of comms.
Yep.
Yeah.
But given the amount of sports in the world, I mean, there's certainly a lot of jobs out there for this kind of work, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways that people run it. Some clubs will keep everything in-house, and they will employ someone who's come out of event manager school, and they will be responsible for running all the game day activations, for booking the face painter, and they'll also be the show caller. But they've only fallen into that show caller role because they have just been lumped with you run everything game day.
You run it on the day, yeah.
So there's a lot of people doing this around the world who I don't want to say shouldn't be doing it, but don't have as many of the skills that people coming from a theatrical background would, or a TV background. I think that's what makes it. You as a theatrical a stage manager are so valuable to a sporting team, but they might not know that.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
And a lot of them have come through sport management or sport and marketing management, and they're kind of then lumped with the pointy end of the game day delivery, which is not something I know that they don't teach in those courses. So, yeah, very vocational, very hands-on, very on the day kind of stuff.
Well, going back to what you said at the beginning, Sam, I mean, it's essentially a show, and that's our skill set.
Absolutely.
That's where you come from. So when you've got to build a show, all those skills that you learn in theatre school then apply in that realm.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
All right. Rusty said, tell us about the narrative and how you compose the day of. So let's just, what do you enjoy about the role on the day? And creating those stories from each of your point of views, and I think we'll finish up there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everything about this business is it's so unique to whatever everyone else does for a job. I kind of got sick of the business when I was about 3 years in and decided I was going to go and work for a bank because I was sick of not seeing my friends and I didn't have any weekends, and that lasted all of about 6 weeks because I missed the excitement and the camaraderie of working with a team. So my day will start, arriving in the morning and kind of sometimes running the meeting that we all have before we start for the day, and kind of just understanding everybody's roles and talking to everyone about how the day is going to work. Then running rehearsals before gates open, which is always an important part and doesn't really have a lot of time allocated to it usually. And there's also scarce resources in terms of content and players and everything that you have access to. Then when the game starts, is kind of just pacing yourself throughout the day and trying to pick out elements throughout the day that you think are going to work for later and hold them in the back of your mind and come to stuff and trust the people around you, especially working with KA. If she says there's something great, then I'll go to it straight away, because I know it's going to be good. And really just trying to cherish those moments of spontaneity and try and guide a crowd through not a moment, but if you see something, trying to highlight it and trying to understand when that can be something that's really going to work. And when those moments are right, and those moments that come out of nothing a lot of the time work really well, that's the best part of my day, I reckon.
Yeah, just the adrenaline. There's nothing better than you queuing the teams on, knowing that there's just recently there was 86,000 people at the Women's World Cup, and you're queuing the teams on. And then you walk out and the teams are standing right in front of you, and you're queuing the anthem knowing there's, 80 million people watching at home. And you're all standing up singing the Australian anthem. I tear up every single time.
Yeah.
Just thinking, and that's when you think, you look around and you're just so grateful for where you're standing. And it's just, I wouldn't do anything else. I love it.
Yep.
The adrenaline, the camaraderie, as Josh said. And when a segment just goes to exactly the way that you want it to, there's no better feeling. There's no better. You love it.
That's wonderful. And you, Sam?
Look, anthems. I get goosey every time I do anthems. I was doing a volleyball world tour for the last 2 years, and just to go into stadiums where people get to sing their anthem in a full stadium, it's so good. It's it can be life-changing sometimes to see Bulgarians. You don't even know what the anthem is or what the words are, but they're so passionate about it. Yeah.
I think, Anna, you had a photo of the anthem, and then me standing directly in front of the teams, and normally I have the broadcast camera to the right, just to show people.
Yeah, I'm just bringing it up now.
Yeah.
It's not a very fast slide.
I think, and the guys with me will probably admit to it as well. It's the drama of sport. Now, I went through a theatre school and I did theatre for a long time, and musical theatre, but there is a drama in sport. You never know the outcome. And to help support that and put fuel under the fire where it's needed for either the fans or the game, or having them understand what's going on, and seeing you really affect those moments, not with what's happening on the field of play, but allowing the audience to sometimes hear themselves and not play music.
Yeah.
To play the right music for them to get on board to all sing at the same time. When New Zealand won silver against Australia, they still did a haka even in their loss. And so I took down all the music so everybody could hear exactly what was going on. And everyone had tears in the eyes because they won silver, they lost the medal, but they were still honouring their opponents. It's those moments making the decisions about where the focus should be for the audience and for the sport is you can't buy stuff like that. It's fantastic.
Mm.
And I think that is a wonderful conclusion to our session. Thank you so much for joining us, you guys. You have a wonderful amount of experience, and I've learned so much today. And I hope that everybody else who has been listening has learned as well. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, guys. Good to see you guys.
Bring back
signing off.
See ya.
See ya. Bye now.
Bye.